Hello, and welcome to the Moss Adams presentation of Enterprise Resource Planning Now, Critical Factors for a Successful Enterprise System Selection. Before we get started, we have a brief video that will improve your participation in today's program.
Moss Adams is pleased to present another in our ongoing series of continuing professional education webcasts. Our presentation will start in a few moments. Before we begin, here are a few things to keep in mind. You can customize both how you view our presentation and how you interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can also adjust window size and placement. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons, each relating to a different aspect of our session. For example, you can click the file folder icon to download the group attendance sheet and a PDF copy of today's slides. You can ask our presenter questions during the webcast by clicking Q&A in the bottom left-hand portion of the icon bar and typing in your question. We'll do our best to answer all questions during the presentation or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty during today's presentation, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. We'll ask polling questions throughout today's presentation. Per the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy Webcast CPE standards, CPE credit will be awarded based on your participation in these polls. To respond to a poll, click the button next to your answer. If you're attending this webcast in a group, in order to receive CPE credit, you must complete our attendance sheet, available in the file folder icon at the bottom of your screen. Please have all group members sign the sheet, and please remit only one sheet per group. Also note, today's session will offer you 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the requirements as specified by the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. CPE credit can be awarded only to participants registered as themselves and is not available to participants who view the on-demand version. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon to open a PDF file you can save to your computer. We'll email a copy of your PDF certificate in 2 weeks if you can't download it today. As a reminder, the presentation you're about to see is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
Presenting today is Labi Rabiu. As a certified consultant with strong expertise in diverse ERP implementations, Labi has been working in strategy, selection, and implementation of enterprise systems across multiple industries since 1997. He has an accomplished record of managing business automation projects, and as a chartered accountant, he brings his extensive knowledge of operations to the implementation process. Labi has deep experience assisting companies in technology roadmaps and selection of ERP, business intelligence, customer relationship management, and human capital management systems. Additionally, he has led and delivered multiple ERP system implementations and optimizations, including SAP Business One, Microsoft Dynamics GP, and NetSuite. He has spent more than 10 years working in IT strategy and compliance roles at national IT companies. Thank you so much for joining us today, Labi. I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you very much, Tanya, for that warm introduction. My name is Labi Rabiu. I'm Managing Director responsible for the ERP practice at Moss Adams, and I thank you all for joining this webinar. Our focus for today's webinar is on the critical factors for a successful enterprise system selection. There are many reasons why ERP system implementations fail. We're going to touch on some of these reasons, but our focus will be on one reason which is often overlooked, and that is poor system selection. Today, I'm going to be proposing a methodical approach to avoid selecting the wrong system. And this approach is based on 5 critical success factors. Firstly, the value of doing research. How to identify your key requirements. How to successfully prepare your vendor shortlist and the request for proposal, otherwise known as RFPs. using a scorecard tool along with your demo script. And finally, how to come up with budget estimate for the implementation cost component, otherwise known as the total cost of ownership estimate. So what are the objectives of this methodical approach? Why take this approach at all? And why would you benefit from it? One reason is to enable you to develop an awareness of the key developments in the ERP landscape, so you can ask effective questions that will help you identify the most appropriate system. Another objective is to enable you to properly define your system requirements. It's also to enable you to apply a methodical approach when evaluating and shortlisting vendors and preparing your RFP. The objective, again, is to enable you to implement a scoring method for effectively comparing the systems against your requirements. And finally, is to enable you to come up with a total cost of ownership estimate for your implementation, but in such a way that you are questioning the thoroughness and accuracy of the estimate well in advance of the implementation. I thought we should take a brief moment to define a number of terms that we're going to be using that may not be familiar to some in the audience. Defining these terms would, I believe, provide some context. So you hear me talk about demo scripts. And a demo script is the agenda for a vendor software demonstration and is usually based on an organization's requirements. Mobile enablement is the use of ERP applications on mobile devices like smartphones and tablets. Examples of such applications are field sales management, field service management, and employee expense approval apps. Project scope refers to your project objectives, requirements, deliverables, costs, and deadline, and is usually defined in such documents as the vendor statement of work, the project plan, the business requirements document, and the design specifications. A scorecard is a scoring framework for assessing and comparing all vendor presentations against your requirements. It provides an objective basis for evaluating vendors and reaching a decision. TCO, or total cost of ownership estimate, is a budget estimate of all known cost components for implementing a specific system. Vendor shortlist is the process of pre-screening and pre-qualifying vendors to be evaluated in the selection process. And finally, virtualization, when used in the ERP context, refers to the consolidation of multiple server hardware and business applications on the same server, usually to reduce hardware expense and lower maintenance costs, and sometimes to actually speed up processing. So now let's address the first item on our agenda. Implementations do fail for a myriad of reasons. I've identified 10 of such reasons here. One reason is poor change management. I always tell my clients not to do the implementation to the end users, but to do it with them. You want to get the end users involved in the process early on, from the time you start gathering your requirements through training, testing, and go-live preparations. And the key to all this is to communicate and communicate. Because however challenging your existing system may be, once folks are invested in it, they come to dislike the change to processes and routines that come with a new system. So the key is to communicate the benefits and get them involved in effecting the change. Date-driven system rollout. Don't set artificial quick end dates for your project because it forces everyone to rush through the implementation and results in poor oversight, inadequate training, inadequate testing, which are all reasons why implementations fail. A project timeline should be driven by a risk-aware project planning that takes into account the duration of the sequence of activities that is required to complete a project, as well as resource availability. Ineffective project management. This is another common reason why implementations fail. You want to vet the designated project manager for the vendor and your own internal project champion to make sure they have strong project management skills and they're experienced. Experienced project managers understand the need for clear project objectives, project governance structure, and risk-aware project planning. They know how to manage personalities and drive everybody towards results. So I would say don't compromise on a good project manager. Review their past project portfolio and get feedback on their performance on prior projects. The use of inexperienced technical resources is another reason. You want to make sure you review the resume of your vendor's technical resource. And I'm talking here specifically about the functional resource responsible for configuring your system and any other solutions or development consultant that may be working with them. You want to make sure they're experienced and are familiar with your type of business. I was once brought in as a consultant for a client on a failing project. And I remember I sat through a few of the vendor training sessions, and I couldn't help but notice that the resource was struggling to navigate through the system. I immediately escalated the problem and requested information on the background of the resource. It turns out it was his first implementation of the system. The vendor had provided my client a resource who had just completed training. And after some back and forth, the vendor eventually pulled in their top resource from another project. So vendors do overcommit themselves. You should always review the resource profile and avoid being the training ground for their green employees. Inadequate training, and this point should be obvious enough, but you find that it has become an issue with the recent vendor emphasis on train the trainer approach. And what do I mean by the train the trainer approach? To reduce implementation costs and ensure rapid implementation, vendors now take the approach of training clients' key business process owners, who in turn will be responsible for training all end users. And there's nothing wrong per se with this approach, because if they are well trained, these internal trainers can provide first level support to all other end users. But given that these trainers will be new to the system themselves, it is imperative that your organization invest in fully training them. You should review the project scope carefully to ensure that adequate time is devoted to training your business process leads. Another reason why implementations fail is failure to give data migration the importance it deserves. However well your system is configured, if you cannot get your data in timely and accurately, you have a problem. Before starting your data migration, you need to have a clear data preparation and migration strategy, including a data rollback plan. Your vendor isn't going to be responsible for data preparation. They give you their template, ask you to complete the templates with your data, and they attempt to load the data for you as provided. If the data fails to load, you're responsible. Therefore, you want to plan carefully to extract data from your legacy system. Cleanse the data so you're not loading junk into the new system, and then obtain guidance from your vendor to map your data to their template. The best practice, in my experience, is to avoid loading years of historical data wherever possible. The further back you go, the more likely you're going to run into data migration issues. So instead of transferring years of historical data from your legacy system to the new system, you can simply keep an archive copy of your legacy data and refer to it when necessary. Another reason is when you skip the testing phase to save time. When you go live on a project with little testing in order to save time and meet the project deadline, you can end up with a lot of issues, and then you start resolving problems in the middle of processing live transactions. And soon enough, you're overwhelmed and you're stuck in an endless loop of bug fixes. So don't cut corners on your user acceptance testing. Have each user test their functional areas as the system is intended to be used, and document the test results. Any issues should be immediately reported on the issue list for quick resolution. And you want to conduct all of these tests in a sandbox, which is an exact backup copy of your production database. And my advice is never to go live until you have resolved all issues that you prioritize as critical on that issue list. A third reason is when you buy a horizontal system and you try to over-customize it. A horizontal solution is one that has wide applicability across industries and only intended for very limited customization. When you over-customize this kind of system, the end results are usually painful, buggy rollout and cost overruns. So don't get carried away trying to customize the system to fit every imaginable wish list. So long as you've purchased the right system, there should be built-in configuration options within the system setup to meet your needs. And if you have one of those employees who get excited at the prospect of developing custom solutions to meet every one of their wish lists, regardless of how low the priority might be, you should rein them in and keep the vendor focused on your most important requirements. Implementations also fail when the project scope is not well defined. Your project scope is the documentation of your project requirements, deliverables, costs, and deadlines as we've defined it. And when this scope is poorly defined, what you find is everyone then tries to shape the implementation, and that usually results in scope creep and cost overrun. On the other hand, when there is a clear documentation of the project scope, you provide a pathway towards achieving your project objectives. And you also provide the project manager with a good leverage to enforce project discipline and keep everyone focused on the agreed blueprint. And number one on my list, which is the focus of our discussion today, is poor system selection. This, to me, is the most underestimated reason why enterprise systems implementations fail. Here is a quote from a noted author who has written about implementation failures. 50 to 80% failure rate on large projects. That's high. And granted, he's talking about large projects here because I believe small projects have a higher success rate because the scope is more manageable. But whatever the percentage may be, I would contend that selecting the wrong system would almost surely guarantee that you would be one of these statistics. So there are consequences to selecting the wrong system. It is the most difficult challenge to overcome in an ERP implementation process. Because when the ERP system is a poor fit, you then have to do extensive customizations to make it work. You have to make needless changes to your processes to fit the system. And you may have to purchase expensive add-on solutions just to make it work for you. And this pitfall can be avoided by taking a methodical approach towards selecting the right system for your business. In the next section, we will discuss this methodical approach in more detail. But for now, I thought we should take a quick poll of the audience. Tanya?
Thank you. So, tell us a little bit about your project plans. So, you do not have a need for an ERP system. You're considering a new ERP system. You already have a system and are happy with it. You have a system but have some challenges and need to improve the system, or we already have a system but the challenges are so serious that they may need to replace it. Select the radio button next to your answer and be sure and press the submit button in order for your answer to be recorded. And Labi, I'd like to, David asked a question. He asked, can you define what constitutes failure in this context? And that was looking at a system, a system implementation failure.
So failure to me is not accomplishing the project objective, and that is successfully going live on the project. When you have extensive delays on the project, or you have to incur huge expenditure just to make the system work, that to me constitutes a failure. And what we're trying to discuss here is what are the contributing reasons to this kind of failure. And I've noted that poor system selection is often the foundation for some of these challenges that folks experience in the course of an implementation.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, let's go ahead and we'll take a look at our results to our first polling question.
Well, it's nice to see that there are some who are happy with their system. And I see that there are 40.9% who are considering a new system. This is going to be very helpful for those. And clearly there are some here who have challenges with their system. 28.8% experience challenges and need to improve their system. And 6.1% say the challenges are so serious that they may need to replace it. For me, whatever the challenge may be, whether you are considering a system for the first time or have challenges with the existing system for whatever reason, there are some critical success factors that you need to be aware of as you consider a new system. And those are the factors I've outlined here. First on my list is to do your research so you can be aware of the most recent developments in the ERP space and know the right questions to ask as you begin your evaluation. And second is to identify your pain points and define your key requirements by business process. You need to take the right approach to putting together your vendor shortlist and RFP. You need to score your demos so you have an objective basis for comparing vendors. And finally, you need to get your TCO right. Now let's start with the first of these factors. Preliminary research. To me, it's essential that you do preliminary research so you can be aware of recent ERP trends. And that's because the ERP landscape is continuously changing. And it has changed significantly in the last decade as it's trended more towards simplified user interface, cloud solutions, and mobile technology. the traditional on-premise vendors are being increasingly challenged by easier to deploy cloud solutions. And many of these vendors have initially responded by offering hosting services, virtualization, and rapid implementation methods to speed up the implementation process. And lately, we have seen more emphasis on a cloud solution across the board, across all vendors, as well as a focus on robust analytics in the so-called IERP or intelligent ERP systems. And just as a sideway, intelligent ERP systems are those that are capable of learning from exceptions and adapting business rules and recommending next best steps. We have also seen omni-channel support. And this is a trend whereby retailers now leverage the ERP system to connect all their sales channels in order to give the customer the same personalized experience, whether the customer is on their web store, on a mobile device, or in the store speaking to a customer service rep. With omnichannel enabled ERP systems, a retailer can very easily reference the customer's previous purchases and preferences, regardless of the sales channel that the customer is choosing to interact with it. These are just examples of some of the trends. So you need to do your research and be aware of the latest trend within your own industry. Then you will be in a position to ask informed questions about your system options. So in doing your research, in addition to being aware of the latest ERP trends, as I've said, you need to ask and obtain answers to some basic questions. For example, what are the ERP tiers? And who are the major players in each tier? Do you fall in tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3? Which systems play strongest in your industry? Are there any lesser known systems or the so-called dark horses that you should consider? And how are the systems differentiated? Some offer a fully integrated approach, while some take the best of breeds approach. You need to know what the differences are between these approaches. And what are the deployment models? Is it on-premise? Is it hosted? Or is it cloud-based? And how well developed is the partner ecosystem? And finally, you need to have a rough idea of the ballpark total cost of ownership estimate for your implementation. So to answer all these questions, you should either assemble an experienced in-house selection team who can do the required research, or hire a good enterprise system consultant who's familiar with your industry. So we're going to pause to take another quick poll. Tanya, you mind taking us through this?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Labi. So why is awareness of recent ERP trends essential? Is it because you may need to consider a cloud strategy for ease of deployment? Perhaps competition means on-premise vendors may offer hosting or other services. Is it ERP systems are becoming more sophisticated and you need to understand their capabilities? Perhaps you are better informed about your options if you know the trends in your specific industry, or all of the above. As before, please be sure to press submit in order for your answer to be recorded. I just wanted to mention here briefly, I've got some great questions coming in the Q&A, we will be saving those for the end unless it's for clarification, but great questions, please keep them coming. We love that. So we'll look forward to covering those at the end of our presentation today. I'll go ahead and we'll close the polls and maybe give them another 5 seconds. So 3, 2, 1, and Labi, let's take a look at our results.
Okay. Oh, we went too far there. We see here that 3% think need to consider a cloud strategy for ease of deployment. 2.5% think competition means on-premise vendor may offer hosting services. 4.5% think the systems are capable, more sophisticated, and need to understand their capability. 3.5% says you're better informed when you know your system. And the correct answer to this is all of the above. And I can see 86.5% of us got that right. And here's why. Cloud strategy may be an option, but you need to understand how cloud systems compare with on-premise systems. Or it may be that a hosting option is a better option for you because it allows you to outsource your infrastructure while retaining control over the application and database. And as I've noted, the systems are getting more sophisticated. I gave a few examples of this. So you need to be aware of the capabilities. And above all, if you're aware of the latest trend in your industry, you'll be better informed about your options. So the correct answer is all of the above. So another critical success factor is how you go about defining your requirements. Your requirements are your decision criteria. One of the most important predictors of a successful selection process is how well these decision criteria are defined. How do you go about this? You must clearly document your most critical needs and avoid an overgeneralized list of requirements. And you should start by defining your business processes in scope and the pain points around each business process. And while defining your pain points, don't limit yourself to now. You should envision your business and product roadmap over a 5-year horizon. Once you fully understand your current system breakpoints and you know what your strategic direction is, then you're ready to work with the process owners to come up with the to-be system requirements. So let's talk about the key things to consider in defining your to-be system requirements. Besides the general requirements that are common to clients in any industry, you want to make sure you focus on your unique industry vertical requirements. And you also need to focus on your compliance and reporting needs. So for example, a pre-IPO life science company that's planning to outsource manufacturing and drug distribution globally to clearly define requirements around their global corporate financial structure, project analysis for tracking costs related to their project portfolio, supply chain visibility to what is happening at contract manufacturers and third-party logistics. And as I said, they should also define requirements around their compliance and reporting obligations. So for example, a public company needs to define requirements around SOX. You need to define requirements around, if you're in a life science business, you need to define requirements around FDA, such as 21 CFR Part 11. You also need to define requirements around the Sunshine Act, which helps you track aggregate expenditure for your healthcare providers, and so on and so forth. And to give you another example of why it's important to define requirements by business process, even while taking your unique industry vertical into account. I once had to run the selection project for a US-based not-for-profit client that was distributing pharmaceuticals in rural Africa. Before we were engaged, the client was more focused on core finance and funds accounting requirements. They thought they could continue to run drug purchase and distribution processes using spreadsheets, since they are not a commercial entity. And once we looked at their operations and growth plan, we quickly made them realize that inventory supply chain management is a key business process area for which they clearly need to define requirements and automate within the ERP. And that's regardless of the fact that they are a not-for-profit. As I recall, our completed requirements doc for this organization included accounting requirements for managing funds as well as business requirements for operations. They would have completely ignored the operations side. So before we move on to the next critical success factor, we'll take another quick poll. Tanya?
Thank you. So in your opinion, what area is the most difficult to manage when it comes to a new system selection? Is it knowing where to start, gathering the right team, establishing necessary system requirements, hiring the right vendor or the RFP process, identifying the known criteria and other non-functional criteria to use to evaluate and score your vendor demos, or quantifying your TCO budget and other costs to consider? Again, be sure and press submit for your answer to be recorded. And as a reminder, this is an opinion. And we'll give them just a few more seconds before we close the poll, maybe 5, 2, 1, and we'll go ahead and let Labi take us through our results.
Well, this question is really a matter of opinion. I would say it depends on your unique situation and in-house expertise. You may be able to assemble the right in-house team who can do your research, but you may not be familiar with how to shortlist vendors and package your RFP. Or your challenge may be how to evaluate and score the vendor demos. Or it could be how to quantify the TCO budget estimate of the implementation cost. So it's really a matter of opinion. It depends on your situation. Moving ahead, a third critical success factor is how you go about your vendor shortlist and RFP. There are many ERP vendor evaluation tools that are available online for generating vendor shortlist. These tools and templates are key enablers to your selection process. The best evaluation tools typically provide predefined questionnaires and templates for capturing key requirements and generating a matching shortlist of vendors. For best results, you should select a proven tool with an expansive library of vendors and flexible user-defined evaluation criteria. However, it's important to note that these tools mostly tend to be generalized list of requirements questionnaires for generating a shortlist. So it's a good idea to incorporate your industry vertical requirements in the questionnaire. Once you have finalized the shortlist, organize your critical requirements to form the core of the RFP to the vendors. And strike the right balance of brevity and clarity in the RFP document. My experience is that vendors are now increasingly reluctant to commit considerable time and resources to responding to lengthy RFP documents. Often, as I said, and there are quite a few vendors who do this, they don't even respond to RFP documents. And for those who do, there are many who just simply answer yes to all the RFP questions. So it's important to keep it brief and clear and to the point. The RFP document should also summarize your company business, the reason for the RFP, the business processes in scope, and the key functional requirements. And continuing on the point to note in an RFP document, the RFP should also elicit information about the vendor implementation approach, their maintenance and support plans, and TCO estimate. And you should be very, very clear about the evaluation and award criteria. For me, when I define my evaluation criteria on an RFP, I usually include the vendor profile, their organizational structure, experience, and expertise. I make sure I include the software application as a criteria, the application itself, how well it meets our specifications. I make sure to include the technology platform of the software, whether that fits with our roadmap. And here we're talking about the system architecture for the system. And I also include the implementation methodology and support approach of the vendor. And above all, cost is always a major item on my evaluation and award criteria for obvious reasons. And on a final note on RFPs, don't ask for lengthy narrative about the vendor history and track record in the industry. Vendors like to talk about themselves, so you can bet that they will cover this during the demo. And this information could be easily obtained while researching the vendor. A fourth critical success factor is how you go about scoring your demo script. I would highly recommend that you develop a demo script and a scorecard for scoring the demos. With back-to-back demos, you may not have a perfect recollection of how the vendors compare on every decision criterion. So it makes sense to keep a scorecard. Besides, using a scorecard has several other benefits, among which are it provides an objective basis for comparing each vendor response to your requirements. It helps you narrow down areas for following up. And it reflects a prioritized feature list, both functional and non-functional criteria. And talking about functional and non-functional criteria, you want to make sure not to focus too exclusively on the functional requirements. There are certain non-functional criteria that you should score, and examples of this include the underlying product technology, resource availability in your local region, the vendor solvency, the support and maintenance track record of the vendor, and the vendor's industry experience. And for partner-supported solutions, you should also score the partner's track record and industry experience. And finally, in going about scoring, you should keep an eagle eye on your demo script. Vendors tend to go off script during demo. So you want to make sure you keep them focused on the script and ask pointed questions on any area that's not clear to you or that they've glossed over. And you should also make sure you revisit your scorecard after seeing each vendor demo. Your goal should be to score virtually all the demo topics and note any areas for follow-up. We'll now pause and take another quick poll before we go on to our last critical success factor.
So thank you, Labi. The many reasons implementations fail, what reason is the most impactful to all areas of the project? So this would be our fourth and final polling question today. So is it the scope is ill-defined and scope creep occurs? Buying a horizontal system and over-customizing it? Again, we're looking for most impactful to all areas. And of course, these are all impactful, but skipping the testing phase to save time, failure to assign data migration, the importance it requires, poor system selection, and poor change management. I think, Labi, I should have put failure to assign data migration, the importance it deserves. So we'll get our audience, get this last polling question accounted for. We'll maybe give them another 5 more seconds to capture everyone, and we'll close the polls in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And let's look at our results.
Well, I'm glad 37.8%, who are the majority here, agree that poor system selection is the most understated reason why ERP implementations fail. And as we've been discussing, this has been the focus of our conversation today. I believe if that foundation is wrong, everything else you build upon it will be on shaky ground. So moving on to the final critical success factor on my list is total cost of ownership. How you go about defining this and what you should consider. When cost overruns occur on an ERP rollout, it is often because the TCO estimate completely misses the mark. And here are a few tips on TCO. First, you want to start your TCO analysis early in the selection process. And I'm talking about from the time you start doing your research and putting together a rough budget estimate of the systems that you'll be considering. And you should continue to fine-tune this estimate until the full cost of your selection becomes clearer. And that is as you receive each vendor response to your proposal. Go back and revise your budget based on what they are showing in aggregate. And be careful when you compare cost of a SaaS solution against on-premise ones. SaaS or cloud solutions tend to have their costs spread more evenly, and they may have a lower year one TCO cost. And that can be quite deceptive. So it's better to compare costs over a longer time horizon. A 3-year TCO estimate is good practice. Continuing on tips on how to put together the TCO estimate, make sure to itemize all expected outlay, regardless of how the system is supported. And that is whether it's in-house, hosted, or cloud-based. An expected cost outlay would include the license or subscription cost, depending on how it's hosted, the implementation cost, including any customizations, training, integration, annual maintenance, and partner support fees. And other costs to consider include IT support of full-time employees you hire to support the system, any additional hardware or virtualization costs, and any additional IT costs for ramping up your internet bandwidth to support on-demand access for a cloud solution. And the final consideration, don't rule out a vendor solely on cost grounds until you've completed your evaluation and negotiation. I wouldn't completely rule out a vendor on cost grounds. And that's because in my experience, vendors tend to drop their list price very significantly in the face of fierce competition. And they often do this at the very last minute. So you want to keep your cards very close to your chest and take full advantage of this. So to summarize, there are a few key takeaways. And the first is there are many factors that influence the success of an implementation. And I've been making the case that selecting the right system is the most critical of this. As I've said, if your ERP selection foundation is not solid, everything else you build on it will be on shaky ground. When an ERP implementation fails, it's sometimes because the selection process falls short. So in conclusion, to improve the chances of a successful implementation, I would recommend understanding your vendor options and the enterprise systems landscape, and that may require doing some research. I would recommend documenting your pain points and doing it by focusing on your business process and defining your key requirements around each process. And I would recommend you take a methodical approach to your shortlist and RFP process, to how you organize the demo and score the demo, And finally, you want to make sure you get your total cost of ownership right, or you may be completely off on your budget. With that, we have come to the conclusion of this presentation, and we'll now open up the floor to questions.
Thank you so much, Labi. That was excellent and informative, as the comments I've received have indicated. So I'd like to jump right into some of the questions that we received in Q&A. So Christopher asks, do you also see the trend of very increased need for system security?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, cybersecurity has become a paramount concern of clients across the board. And that has led to an increased focus on how to strengthen access to the system. So you do see on implementation projects these days a focus on access security, and I've seen a lot of, especially cloud vendors who support additional security features beyond just having users log in on their browsers. I mean, I'm talking about two-factor authentication, use of fobs, use of single sign-on. So yeah, given the real concern and real and genuine concern about cybersecurity and unauthorized access to system, we see a lot of concern around that across the board.
Thank you. Great. So you made a reference to this term earlier, and Eleanor asks, what is a partner ecosystem?
So a partner every partner, and I'm talking about the more mature ERP system, have what I call a partner ecosystem, which is really a number of service providers who either sell and implement their system or who have written custom add-on solutions or custom applications that integrate with their system. And the point here is that you should evaluate and consider how well developed this partner landscape is. Because if the vendor doesn't sell directly, they're selling through partners, then you have to go through one of these partners. So you want to make sure that they have enough partners in their ecosystem, that this ecosystem is so well developed and there's variety in there, so that you are not locked in with any single partner in case things go wrong. You should be able to fire a partner and move on to another one if you're not getting the kind of service you deserve. So you need to focus on the partner ecosystem for that reason.
Nice, nice. Let's take one more. So in your experience, which are the best vendor evaluation tools and templates online?
So we usually try not to endorse specific evaluation tools. I mean, I have used quite a number of these. I mean, there are folks who use Gartner, there's some who use Aberdeen Group, there's some who use Tech Evaluation, some use the Accounting Library. There's so many of them. And again, we want to be very careful about not endorsing one over the other. But there are, if you go online and you just Google how to evaluate ERP systems, you would see a number of these come up on the list. But my key point is to make sure you're using a tool that has a very well-developed landscape and a very well-developed library of vendors. And the reason for this is this would help you in the shortlisting process, and this will help you in deciding which vendors to focus on. So you want to make sure they're using you're using a feature that's widely in use, that is highly recommended by peers, and it's got great recommendation across the board. But we'll usually refrain from endorsing one tool over the other.
Great. Sounds like a good safe policy. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Labi. We hope that you'll join us again for future presentations. What we would ask is if you do find you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Labi. If you asked a question and we did not get to it, I still have a few coming in, I will make sure that Labi follows up with you and answers your questions directly. And thank you for joining us. Please take a moment and complete a brief survey to tell us how we did and how we can do better. And if there's topics that you'd like to have us cover, please be sure and include that information. On behalf of Moss Adams, thank you very much, and thank you, Labi.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.